Okay, so it's been a long time since our last video, so I thought I'd just go through quickly history of this car and me, and the thought patterns and things that we've been doing over the last 12 months, just to make sure we're on the right track of where we want to go. So, history of this car. I bought this car in 94 as a running driving car as a 19-year-old. This was my daily driver for 5 or 6 years. It was already modified when I bought it, so it already had the 2-litre Pinto 4-speed uprated to Mark II bigger brakes and suspension all the way through it, running 13x7 factory steel rims with hubcaps, lowered. So that was basically how I had it, and I drove it like that for 2 or 3 years until the 4-speed broke. Once the 4-speed broke, I upgraded to a Supra 5-speed, which involved cutting and putting a slightly bigger tunnel in it. Put the Supra 5-speed in it. At that stage, I actually also put it onto gas, straight LPG, no fuel. So we pulled out the back seat. Gas tank went in where the back seat was, had a 74-litre gas tank, which for the amount of driving I did was great. Meant I only needed to fill up once a fortnight. And I could also do big, long country trips without having to worry about fuel. So with the 5-speed and the 74-litre tank, gave it about a 700 to 800k range without having to fill up, which is fantastic. Then the next step from that was it had a couple of rust things in this sill, in this guard, around the lip, on this back guard. So I actually broke the motor, had a head gasket issue, and while the engine was out to get rebuilt, standard story, I stripped it and was just going to do the rust repairs, repaint it, put the engine back in, keep driving it. Here we are 23 years later, and it's still not there because we got carried away. So I thought I would explain how we got carried away, how we ended up in this mess. So I was stripping the car up at a very good mate's of mine's house because at that stage I didn't have a shed. I don't have much of a shed now. So I have the carport, which has been enclosed kind of to give me some space, and I have a 6x3 metre shed, which thank God it's an Escort because otherwise I wouldn't have much room. So I was up at a mate's house using his shed. So after stripping the shed, coming in, I had this seat in the car, but it was much further forward. So the factory seats bolt into that cross member there. So we're a good 300mm back from that cross member where we are now. But even then, I'd already moved the seat back several times. Not sure. So I already moved the seat back several times. Can't see the old holes that it used to be into. It still had the factory column in it. And when I put it on gas and did the 5-speed, the shifter moved back a little bit, so it gave me a little bit more. So I moved the seat back a little bit further because I'm 6 foot, so just getting away from the pedals. I also lowered the seat further, and as you lower the seat, you've got to get further away from the pedals. It's a catch-22. And I actually put harnesses in the car at that stage. There was no roll cage. Harnesses just bolted down through the rear parcel shelf with plates underneath. So what that meant was when I was driving the car, I was at full reach on the steering wheel, on the factory wheel, which was somewhere about here. With the 5-speed, with 2 fingers I could push it to first. Second, third, fourth and fifth were all in motion, but I couldn't reach first. I couldn't reach the ignition with my seatbelt harness on, so I had to loosen off the harnesses to start it, or if it stalled, I had to loosen off the harnesses to start it. I couldn't reach any of the switches that were up here in the dash that I've already welded up and filled up. Couldn't reach any of those, so the electric window switches were up here on the dash, and they were stick-out toggle switches, one each side. I used to actually operate those with my foot because I just couldn't reach them. I was sitting too far back from the dash. So after having a break and going in and having a cuppa and a packet of Tim Tams, we discussed the scenario of I'd really like to, one, move the wheel back because I'd like to have the seat further back still. So I'd like to move the wheel back. But if you're going to move the wheel back, you need to move the shifter back. And if you're going to move the shifter back, you may as well move all the switches and build them into a center console. So that kind of started the trap. So basically I pulled everything out, pulled the steering column out, bolted the seat in with just the pedals relative to how I wanted them to operate. Then I grabbed a steering column. This one's out of a UC Tirana because I liked the minimalistic fashion of it. It's only got one indicator stalk on the other side, which is just indicator and wipers. So it's very minimalistic, which is what I like. That was the look I was doing. So we've gotten rid of the ignition lock on it. This is actually 2 pieces. This is off an LJ Tirana, the bottom half, the top half's UC, and we've fitted them together to make it slim. Ignition switch is now moved down here to the center console. All the switches are moved to the center console. Electric windows, center console. So everything's down the center console now, easy to reach. So once the seat was mounted, we mounted the steering wheel where we wanted it. To give you an idea, this is a 3-inch gauge, 2-inch gauge, which are not going to be used anymore because I'm going to go to a digital dash. So that's going to change that. Then once we had the wheel in, we built the shifter location relative to the wheel, and then we made the center console. So that's how we got things out of control. From there, it just snowballed. Okay, so starting in the front, still got the old gas lines and lock-offs still in position, which they'll go because it won't be going back on gas. It'll be going on to fuel and E85 and all that sort of good stuff. So one of the first mods we've done is this front cross member has actually been cut apart and modified. So the engine mount location is in the factory position, but everything, all this front cross member and everything is actually been moved forward 35 millimeters to get some more caster in the front end. We're actually going to go to rear mount, so these have to come off, and I'm going to remount the rack. So we'll go to a rear mounted rack with more caster in the front end. That has resulted in all the sway bar mounts and everything here have been cut and modified. So the sway bar now fits almost directly up behind this front cross member, whereas usually they're back quite a bit. But it just snuck in, so it's still a standard front sway bar, standard length back, and it's all the modifications are here in this bracket to move that front mount sway bar section forward. So that's all been moved to take care of that 35mm that we've moved the wheel forward. So that's purely for caster, try to gain some more caster in it. I'm going to be running probably power steer, so the heavier steering's not going to be an issue. We have cut the whole front of the car out fairly well to allow for intercooler down the front. There's a few other little bits and mods and bits and pieces, but all that's probably going to be changed again as we're moving again from what we've done, which is the problem when you've got a long-term project. That tends to happen. Front brakes, front suspension is pretty much still Escort. It's all Escort. Nothing radical there as far as shocks and so forth. Front wheels, this is a 17x8. This is just a mock-up rim. It's one that I got for cheap, that's the right size that I can put on there. The wheels will be a black and silver rim, so it's the same colour tone. It's the correct size, correct offsets. I'm actually planning on running a Porsche Fuchs style rim. So that style of Porsche rim. These were the original wheels that I was going to put on the car. That's a 16 inch rim, but they unfortunately are no longer big enough to fit over the brakes, because originally I was going to run those brakes that are there, which was a 280mm vented rotor, but I've since upgraded to 311. We're going to go full Porsche, 4-piston calipers off the base model 996. So that's resulted in having to go up to a 17-inch rim. And what pushed that was the fact that we're now using the Porsche 911 996 independent rear. And I was unable to get anything smaller than an 18-inch rim to fit over that rear end. And the issue was this tie rod adjustment. And you can see this is an 18-inch rim on the rear, and you can see how close that is. I've got some aftermarket adjustable tie rod links that will give me a little bit more clearance than that again, so that I can get that away from that reel. But that's a 18-inch rim, so having to go up to an 18-inch rim there, I was kind of forced to change out my fronts as well. So we've gone up to a 17x8 on the front and 18x10 on the rear. So that's a fairly big tyre package for a little car. It's probably over-tired, but we do that sometimes. So some of the things we've done on the inside. This bar was here when I had it on gas. So this was the point of the rear parcel shelf used to come through all the way to this point. Roll cage wasn't in at that stage. That's something that I've added, but I'm still not happy with that. That's got to come out and get redone. My driving position, basically that seat touches this bar in my driving position. And over the years, I'd shifted the seat back so far I couldn't reach the steering column anymore. So we actually have a full custom steering column, custom position. As you can see, it's a long way back from factory. That resulted in having to move the shifter. So this hole here is the original shifter position with the Supra 5-speed, which is actually a little bit further back than the factory 4-speed. And in this position now, the shifter position comes up and we have an external linkage that we've built, comes up over the top into this shifter location to give us our shifter. Bigger tunnel for the Supra 5-speed, that's been put in. We're now clearancing firewalls in the back here due to those bigger tyres. I don't know how there's plenty of people running a 17.8 on a Mark 1 Escort around the world. So unless they've done some serious work to their to the rear firewall section there. I'm not sure how they make them fit, because my wheels have moved 35 mil forward, so that makes a massive difference. So shifter position's been moved back. This shifter position is pretty much in the factory handbrake position, so now handbrake is moved back further along the line. This car has electric windows. It's had electric windows in it since I've bought it. That was one of the mods that the previous owners had done. Now, we've done quite a lot of work to the rear quarters and the front guard. As much as I do like the look of the bubble arches on a Mark 1, I wanted to stay away from it because I like the look of this style line too much, and I don't like the way the bubble arches cut into them, both front and rear. We've stretched this whole quarter. This point here through the center above the wheel arch is out about 2 inches. And I did that with just hammer and dolly and Porta Power. So hydraulic ram inside the roll cage with some 6mm MDF strips, all taped together, about 7 or 8 layers of MDF, about 1.5 meters long, so it fitted all the way through the guard, and gave some flex as we pushed. So I would put that above the style line, jack the Porta Power to the point where it was pulling tension, and then hammer and dolly this area underneath the style line, and then switch it from above to below the style line, jack that, and then hammer and dolly above it to get this to stretch out. And at some angles you can really see how far we've gone. If you can see how much that sticks out from that doorway, that style line, this top style line is unchanged, so that's in the factory position. We've just really jacked out that middle style line to curve that out. So I'm not sure if it's the same sort of width as a car that's bubble arched, but it'd be fairly close. So we're working to do the same at the front, keep that style line and bring that out, because the length of this isn't as long as that rear quarter. It would be very difficult to get this point here back into the door. So I'm using that space to vent high pressure, to try to get high pressure zone out from underneath the car. So in all, I'm really liking the way that looks. Sorry about that. Okay, so wheel arch has all been moved. These points here are actually a long way out. If we look inside the boot, we can see that it's all been sliced and moved away. So we're a good 2 inches out there, and the same's occurring on the front. Up underneath here. This is all sliced. This point here is about 2 inches out from factory to try to get out to cover those wheels. On the front, I'm doing the same. This point here is out about 1 inch or so. I need a little bit more at this stage. I don't quite have enough clearance at this point. I want that wheel to come out a little bit further to give me some room for some longer springs to run all the way down the shock past the wheel, so that I don't have any spring bind issues. So I need to do a little bit more work on this. I need to get this to come out a bit further. We're running the vent on the back of the guard to try to evacuate out high pressure, and we're looking at trying to vent air from the engine bay out into the guard and down the side of the car instead of having it go down underneath. So the plan underneath, aero-wise, is probably to run some form of front splitter at the height of the bottom of the cross member there. So that'll come forward at the bottom of the cross member, and run a flat floor at that level underneath the entire car, and then a diffuser at the back. I want to stay away from big wings and all that sort of stuff, because I just like the look of the car and I don't want to affect it too much. So all the things I'm doing is trying to enhance the looks and the styles of it without affecting the look too greatly. I want it to still look like a fairly standardish Mark 1 Escort to someone that's not privy to them. You probably will end up with a bit of the old boot style spoiler. I want to stay away from wings, so the front splitter won't be too big, because I don't want to overbalance the aero to the point that I have to run a big wing. I want to do all the aero stuff underneath the car if I can, so that it's not visible. Okay, so that's where it's sitting. That's a bit of the history. The last 6 months I've been checking roll centers front, rear. I have some computer programming that allows me to check roll centers. I'd like to get the roll center a bit lower in the front, which is going to involve lowering the outer ball joint. Not sure how we're going to do that yet, but that'd be good. Rear roll center's fairly close, but I'm thinking, just looking at that flat floor, trying to keep that flat floor, I think I need to lift up the rear suspension probably about another inch, just so that I can get that flat floor to go all the way underneath the rear suspension cradle, and not have anything dropping there. That's not going to affect my roll center too much. In fact, that's going to help probably balance my roll center front to rear, because it's a Porsche rear suspension, and all the weight in the Porsche is low and at the back. The rear roll center of this suspension is automatically very low. So if anything, it's too low in the rear compared to the front, just to keep the balance. So raising that a little bit more will help me with that, and then lowering the front roll center should help me with that too, to try to get some balance out of that. How do we know where those roll centers sit? A lot of it's a little bit of guesswork, because I don't know what the center of gravities are going to be. I don't really know where those are all going to fit out, so we're just working in ballparks. These are all things that you can tune out later with bars and springs and that sort of stuff, but the closer you can get the thing to work straight away, the better the car's going to be. So with roll centers, because this is a front engine rear drive, you've got roughly 60%, 40% weight distribution. So generally your roll center in the rear is higher than the front, because your center of gravity is higher in the rear because it's working through the bodywork, whereas the engine and everything is actually quite low in the front. So generally your center of gravity is lower in the front, in a front engine rear wheel drive scenario. The Porsche is kind of completely opposite, in that the roll center tends to be a little bit lower in the rear compared to the front, because you've got that less mass at the front. So because of that Porsche suspension, we're throwing in a lot of curveballs. It would be much easier just to put a live rear end in it, 4-link, go down that tried and true line. That would be far easier and far simpler, but anyone can do that. So rear suspension's got to come up a little bit. I think the rear suspension's got to, I've got to narrow it a little bit more. Let me grab that. I've got to narrow the rear suspension a little bit more to get this to fit. I either pump this guard more, but this guard's really at the point where it's about as far as it's going to go. I've tweaked just here in stretching it. Pulling this has tweaked in here. And the material's been worked so much now that it's very hard to move now in this guard. We've pushed it about as far as it's really going to like to go. And at the moment can we see it? We're very close here on the inside. I probably want to get another 10 mil on that wheel. So we're probably looking at narrowing this rear the rear end another 20 mil from where we are, just to give us some clearance into that guard. That's pretty easy to do at the moment because we haven't got anything mounted, and that's one of the reasons we've held back, because we haven't built the chassis rails to mount in that suspension at this time. So at the moment it's all just sitting on the jig underneath, so we can just pull that out, adjust our jig to raise it up another 25-30 mil, whatever we lock in as the height we want to do, and we can also just narrow it in, because at the moment I've just got some temporary braces through the middle, so we'll narrow it in probably another 20 mil on what we are, which will actually help raise our roll center a little bit too, and get that back in, and then we can work from there. So I've been working on getting everything locked in, making sure I know what positions I want everything in, because once I get this rear suspension in, that's going to anchor everything going forward. So this is a critical position to get it just where we want it. So that's about where it sits. So hopefully over the next month or so, as things get a bit warmer, it's not so cold out here in my shed, maybe I'll get some time, we'll get back onto this old girl.